What a strange fight. Derek Brunson defeats Kevin Holland by a decision. Kevin Holland mostly had the striking advantage, whereas Derek Brunson had the control on the ground. The takedowns came pretty easy, but it wasn't necessarily Derek Brunson who was making it that easy. It was ultimately Kevin Holland who was digging himself in so deep after his punches, he was pretty much giving his body or giving his hips to Derek Brunson to tie up and trip to the ground, or to go for that double leg takedown, instead of keeping at his own range so he would have some sense of control in the fight. And that was the main thing going against Kevin Holland this one. He did not move forward and back with his punches. He had one direction every time he attacked. It was always forward. When he decided to throw punches at Derek Brunson, he was continuously only moving forward. With all the power he had and all the extension into his punches, he abandoned defense in order to knock out Derek Brunson. This is where a corner would have really helped the younger fighter to compose himself, or at least trying to calm him down. Because Kevin Holland didn't necessarily talk to his corner that much, he had more interest to talk to Khabib Nurmagomedov, who was cage side, who ultimately is not going to give him any advice, or not going to give him the kind of cornering that his own coaches will give him, right? Khabib is not getting paid by Kevin Holland to corner. He didn't work with Kevin Holland for months in preparation for this fight. He didn't spend so much time to prepare such a young fighter with so much hype behind him for the biggest opportunity of his career. Kevin Holland was more willing to talk to that guy rather than the coaches. And when he did focus more on the coaches and he was kind of tired between the 4th and 5th rounds, he was the one that was talking the most instead of listening to what his corner is saying. As the saying goes, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. But more on that later, as it will tie in more of the other things Kevin Holland was doing inside the action against Derek Brunson and where the corner would have helped him even there. So yes, he was throwing out defense for offense, and it got him in so much trouble throughout the fight for 5 rounds. But there was one moment where it almost worked. He hurt Derek Brunson, or he dropped him in the 2nd round, as Derek did not even establish his takedown yet. He didn't even attempt one takedown by the time he got dropped in the 2nd round. The reason why the fight went to the ground in the 1st round was because Holland unfortunately slipped when he was going to throw a knee, which showed you that Derek Brunson did not have the feeling yet of when to attempt his takedowns. So when the first time Kevin Holland came in strong, Brunson didn't know how to react to it yet. It was after this exchange where he got hurt and dropped, where he found his first takedown shot. Brunson was gauging with his jab and leaning to his left, but he was evading a setup rather than the big shot. He saw the left hook coming, he thought it was going to be the committed punch, he leans over and extends himself at the end of his sequence, where Kevin Holland can chase him down, hunt him with that right straight. And that's what starts it all off. Because what you notice is Derek Brunson does it again. He leans to his left and throws out a jab to measure. He touches Kevin Holland just slightly, but ultimately misses the full impact of the punch. And Kevin Holland stings him with a longer, more powerful straight right hand. The right straight is way more powerful than the jab, especially when the guy's moving forward like this. And from there, Kevin Holland just going crazy. He's just swinging wild. He wants to get that early knockout and make a statement in the middleweight division, where he throws a left hook and drops Derek Brunson, going by the principle that straight punches beat looping punches. Brunson winds up a big left hand as Kevin Holland just shoots out his right straight down the center and lands clean, putting Brunson on one knee. As Brunson was rising to his feet, there was this punch right here that if Kevin Holland was just slightly quicker on the punch, or he targeted his punch like a few centimeters to the right, he would have ended this fight 100%. Look how close this punch gets to Derek Brunson. Yeah, if that punch landed, this fight would have been over. But again, like we just talked about, because Derek Brunson was able to slip the punch, and that's ultimately what it was, he was able to just slip the punch, and he leans to his left to get in for the takedown to counter that aggression. It's what we were talking about before. Kevin Holland sacrificed defense to chase the knockout, ultimately giving up his body and hips for Derek Brunson to shoot in on him. And from that, Brunson was able to lift his leg up, carry it on his shoulder, as he reverses the position with Kevin Holland, so now he's in the advantage. Look how different this position is now. Kevin Holland had him in the worst position Derek Brunson was in the entire fight, and now it reversed completely because of a simple mistake that Kevin Holland made. If he ultimately just kept his distance instead of rushing in the way he did, being overzealous for the knockout, and composed himself, by maybe even feinting to get this reaction out of Derek Brunson, then time the counterpunch by simply backstepping or planting himself where he just was, he could have landed right here 100%. Because he does have to know that Derek Brunson did not have all his faculties in order there. He was rocked. He would have reacted to a feint. He would have reacted to anything Holland would have threw in his face. And that is what some of the best snipers in the UFC are able to do. Simple feint and then look for the big punch, instead of just winging out, hoping to get that early knockout. Of course, this comes with experience and age, as Kevin Holland is still pretty young in this game, or at least in the organization at the highest level. So hopefully this would be more of a learning lesson for him to not chase knockouts and dig himself into a wrestler so much to put himself in such disadvantaged positions. Because again, just like this and other moments in this fight, there were opportunities for him to get the knockout or land something much bigger than what he attempted. And ultimately, Derek Brunson was able to land his left hand off of these positions and even get Kevin Holland some sort of trouble getting the trip right afterward. And not only that, from there, he gets an easy mount. Another example of this happening wasn't as crazy, wasn't as obvious, but let's look at this in the third round. Derek Brunson's back is closer to the cage again, which means it's going to be harder for him to get that double leg takedown, or in fact, all of his attacks are going to be a lot more obvious as long as Holland keeps distance on him, because again, he is the much longer fighter, and he's the faster fighter. He should be able to react to everything Brunson is going to be doing at this range, and not only that, look how he has wrist control. Look how he's trapping that lead hand. He has so much control in this position, not only the range, but also limiting what limbs Derek Brunson can use here. As being in the opposite stance, he can throw out this right straight, which he does. But the thing was, he dug himself in again. He has to know that Derek Brunson is going to look to counter or move away from the punch, because he's not necessarily moving or doing anything in this position. As you know, throughout the entire fight, Derek Brunson kept moving his head away from Kevin Holland's right hand. He always looked to either move his head to the left or straight backwards. These are evasive instincts on that powerful right hand, which should be noted down by Kevin Holland, or at least his corner. Shame he didn't listen to them. This should be noted down to know what Derek Brunson is going to do whenever I throw out this big, powerful right hand. But the fact that he does throw it, he throws a lot of commitment to the point where his rear foot advances forward without moving his lead foot anywhere. This not only gets him closer to Derek Brunson, digs himself again into the wrestler, but it squares up his stance for a potential double leg takedown, but Derek Brunson go for the single leg. There was a double leg that was easier for Derek Brunson to get a hold of and get Holland to the ground. Ultimately, he does get it to the ground, so it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, but these are the little things that Derek Brunson's going to look at in the fight and think, oh man, that would have been an easier takedown there. You know, maybe in the future I should work on that sort of stuff. And notice, like I was saying before, the more times you see Kevin Holland dig himself into the wrestle like this, the more you see Derek Brunson going for the takedown instead of just trying to evade the punch like he did the first time in the second round where he got dropped. He didn't have the feeling for the takedown, but because of that sequence, because he survived that sequence, he got the feeling of when to shoot in the takedown, and he did it almost every single time afterward. This is evident of a big fight IQ difference, because Brunson was able to change things up mid-fight, whereas Kevin Holland didn't. But ultimately, on the ground, Derek Brunson didn't do a whole lot other than the mount take and the way he was able to set up the arm triangle, and the way he set up the arm triangle by simply punching forward and then masking the arm triangle attempt right inside of those punches. Same motion, all that stuff. This all happened in the second round. Everywhere else, he was just simply controlling Kevin Holland without doing much damage or advancing in crazy positions. In fact, Kevin Holland had really good defense against the ground and pound. It's hard to hit this guy clean. The talk and all that stuff may have an effect on Derek Brunson, but ultimately, the punches were getting thrown, and Kevin Holland was able to defend almost all of them. Holland also had the body lock. He did not allow Derek Brunson to posture up, but this ultimately put himself locked in the guard, so he couldn't stand up himself. But that ultimately showed why his defense was so solid. And there was one missed back take attempt from Derek Brunson that would have probably even made this fight even easier for him, especially in that second round. Kevin Holland pushed off the fence so he could turn over, giving up his back, and Derek Brunson looked like he had the perfect position to hook on to Kevin Holland, but ultimately he just doesn't. It's not even the first time. Derek Brunson is not someone who's super comfortable, or super confident, should I say, in going for these dominant positions rather than using his wrestling instead. He will stick to his wrestling positions more than his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And there was one other thing that Derek Brunson was doing in this fight continuously, every single round almost, that got himself countered. He would throw a feint jab from a very far range against a longer guy, which is never really the best thing to do, or he would simply hop into a lead leg kick to throw his own jab over the top. This was never really a good weapon for him to use against Kevin Holland specifically, because whether it be the right straight just getting on the outside of the jab, or Kevin Holland just attacking first as Brunson hops into him, it was never really the best attack to go for, especially against someone as long and fast as Kevin Holland, especially because he was so right-handed heavy. The way Kevin Holland's throwing his right hand, he's going to get his head slightly off the center line, ultimately not going to get hit by anything Brunson's throwing at him, and puts Brunson in line of sight of that right straight. Now, about the cornering and Kevin Holland's actions in the corner in the last 12 seconds of the fight. I honestly think probably a big reason why Kevin Holland didn't make any adjustments in the fight at all, besides a little bit in the 5th round where he was a little bit more measured, but ultimately that was a bit too late. The measuring approach is not going to get him the knockout that he needed, especially the way he was going by it. He was trying to get that takedown. He was so happy to get that trip on Derek Brunson, becoming the first guy ever to take Brunson to the ground. He was not listening to his coaches. He was talking to Khabib Nurmagomedov. He was the one that was talking the most in the corner whenever the coaches were trying to talk to him, and that's all great. Talking to Khabib, talking to Dana White, having fun in the corner and stuff is all fine, only if you're winning. When you're losing the fight, you need some advice. You need to change up the fight a bit, unless you're a mastermind of the game and you could do it yourself, which Kevin Holland did not really show that in the fight, given how many times he threw himself into the wrestler like that. He needed to listen to his corners, because Khabib was not going to tell him anything, obviously. He has a corner there. Khabib is just there to watch the show. He's not there to corner. He's not getting paid by Kevin Holland. So hopefully that's going to be a learning process for Holland coming into his future fights in case he is losing. If he's winning, doing all the talking and stuff is going to be fun. But when you're losing, you got to understand when is the time to change up what you're doing in the fight and focus on what's most important. Yes, taking down Derek Brunson is an accomplishment, but it does not compare to having a win over that guy. It's better to beat Derek Brunson than take him to the ground once. And not only that, look what happened in the last 12 seconds of the fight. He got up from the ground, which is something he did not do that often, and then he pretty much just gave up. He didn't have any urgency to look for a finish. There's 12 seconds. Anything can happen in 12 seconds. We've seen dozens of knockouts happen in less than 12 seconds. You gotta go for it, right? You trained so hard to get to this opportunity. You just fought 24 minutes and 48 seconds against a contender of the division, someone who's fought everybody pretty much. It's your big opportunity, and then you just give up before crossing the finish line? Doesn't matter if you finish second. You gotta cross that finish line, man. You can't just walk off the track. That just shows Kevin Holland gave up on himself a bit. Maybe he says that he was joking in that moment, but even joking in that moment is the same thing as giving up. If you're not looking to win, if you're not looking to make something happen in those 12 seconds, because that's a very short amount of time, that's pretty much just giving up the fight. All the talking and antics from Kevin Holland was kind of weird to see given how the fight was going, but those last 12 seconds was something I really didn't like at all. From a young guy like him, no urgency, in the biggest opportunity of his career so far. He has so much hype behind him. There's so many people that want to see him win, and that's the way he ends the fight. You do not normally see that kind of thing, man. You never really see guys give up losing in a fight like that. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't down and out and stuff like that. There was still time for him to do something in the fight. And that's what just did not make sense to me at all. I know amateur fighters that would have went for it. I know people listening to this video, if they were in there, they would have tried to make something happen. That's the sort of craziness I think about. Heck, Fitzgerald, who was commentating, would have probably tried to do something in 12 seconds. Fitzgerald goes in for the flying armbar. I can agree with some people that say that Kevin Holland should probably apologize to his corner, but man, that was really weird to see. Something I did not expect out of Kevin Holland ever. But ultimately, it was a good win for Derek Brunson. His trajectory has to go up from here. He beat 2 prospects in a row, which tells you he's got to fight contenders now. Paulo Costa, that's the fight for him. Paulo Costa, the top 5 opponent. If he gets a win over Costa, he's like 1 fight away from a title shot. That's exactly what Derek Brunson needs, and that's actually a fight where he can absolutely win. Everybody else above him is kind of fighting besides Costa, right? When you have Robert Whittaker versus Kelvin Gastelum, you got Darren Till versus Marvin Vettori, and then Israel Adesanya is waiting to see what happens between those fights. Costa's the only guy, right? He said he felt ill. That's the reason why he didn't fight Robert Whittaker. Well, maybe in a few months he'd get better, and he could go up against Derek Brunson. I think that makes perfect sense. You got to reward the veteran here. You got to give him an opportunity. You put him up against the prospects to test both the prospect and Derek Brunson as a quote-unquote gatekeeper for the top contenders. But because he passed those tests, you got to reward him to fight those contenders now. He has to go right back at it. So good performance by Derek Brunson, and I hope you guys enjoyed the breakdown. If you did, make sure to thumbs up, drop my content, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.